Guys, today I will be making the tutorial. I will be showing you how to write this method, function, or subroutine. It doesn't really matter how you call it. I will be showing you how to write this method that shows the prime numbers. So what this method will do is it will take in parameters or arguments that is a number, and then that number will be the maximum number. For example, you put in 100. So this function or method we're about to start coding will loop through 0 or from 1 up to 100 and then print only the prime numbers. Okay, so let's get started. Today is Wednesday, 21st of June, and yep, let's get started. So what do we do first here? Well, to let you know what I'm using Java. The IDE that I'm using is Eclipse. So if you have Eclipse installed on your system and you're able to create a project and create like classes, then you'll be able to follow along. All right, so let's get started. As you can see here, public class find prime numbers. That's what I have named the class, and then inside the class we have a public this is a constructor. If we go constructor, and this one is our main method. So what does the main method do? The main method is the heart of this program. When you call the class, the main method will be executed. So everything we do in this class, you have to register in public static void main in order for that function to be called, or to be functional, or to come into state. So let's get started. So what are we coding for? So just a little bit of what this class is all about. Pretty much write your name, Ernest, and talk about what this class will be doing. So this function will print all of the prime numbers less than 100. Let's say less than 100 to print a number, an existing function called print. And then on top of that, we'll go ahead and implement a function called print. So that print function will be responsible for printing. So in object-oriented programming, everything is in objects or functions. So whenever you want to call a function that does something, you only call it once. That makes it very easy for other developers to call that function. For example, you have a function that takes in a parameter or an argument. You call that function, you pass in your own argument, and it returns the process, what it is supposed to do. So I'll go ahead and say to print a number, an existing function. Did I write that right? Okay, an existing function code print int x will be used. So now we have defined the scope, what this class is going to do. Let's get started. Okay, so we will make our method private, maybe static. If many of you guys who doesn't know, static methods mean that you're able to call the same method in other classes. You will just reference the main class dot this method you are defining here, so you don't have to instantiate a class, make an object out of the class, and then able to access the method that are implemented, that are in that class. So when you make your method static, you'll be able to call that method just referencing the class itself. When I mean class is this one, you just write find prime numbers dot, and then you get access to static method. So make that static void, let's say find prime numbers. All right, so that's a function. I always like to indicate that this function has ended, so I would say find prime numbers function ends. Okay, so private static void find prime numbers. So what are we doing here? We will go and implement an array. So let's say array of prime numbers, okay, is equal to new int. So that is an array, ladies and gentlemen, and then that array takes a size. So one thing about arrays that I want to talk about is that a lot of developers really prefer using a list, because a list doesn't have you don't have to say the maximum size here. The list is dynamically resizes. If you have 100 objects in the list, it will resize and give space to the list. So an array, the problem with an array that a lot of developers sometimes don't like to use arrays, because you have to explicitly indicate or show how big the array, like the size of an array. So I would say, so before we put in the size of an array, let's pass in the arguments. So first number, and then this one will get another like end number, and then when we come here we say end number. The reason why we're passing end number as the array size, maybe let's say end number +1, just to give it space to breathe. So the reason why we put in end number here is because this is the maximum number that we put in. For example, we want to find prime numbers between maybe 2 and 88. So 88 being the maximum number, so we want the array of prime numbers to have the size of 88 +1, just to be safe. Okay, and then int number. So what we'll do, let's just go here and comment something. So this array will hold prime numbers, and then here declare a count to increment. So here what we'll do here is declare a counter to increment. Is that right? Yep. Increment the number. All right, so a counter is basically just a number, a variable holding a number that increments every time we loop through, just to keep track or to be functional with a for loop. So int number, okay, just say let's say increment okay, so is equal to 2, right? So why did I have to say int increment is equal to 2 is because 0 and 2 are not prime numbers. So pretty much it starts at 3. Prime number starts at 3. So and then loop through 1 and 100. So here that's when I will put the for loop. We'll say loop through 1 and 100. Okay, so for int I is equal to first number. Okay, so int I is equal to first number. The first number I is less than and number dot length and number, we shouldn't put length there, and number, and then I plus plus, we want to increment I, and then in here that's where the magic starts. We say for the value of the counter into an array. So put the value of the counter into an array. So we say array of prime numbers. I don't know why the IntelliSense is not working. Maybe I should empty the cache. Array of prime numbers. Okay, so we want the array of prime numbers, and what we want to access, we want to access the index of I. For example, this int I is equal to first number, right? So if we put in first number, let's say 2 as the first number. So the int I is equal to first number, which means I is equal to 2, and then I is less than n number, and then the n number is 100. I plus plus, so it will loop from 2 to 100, and it will increment. So this is what the for loop does. So we want array of prime numbers at index I, so which means if I is 2, this array of prime numbers at index 2 will be equal to increment, right? Yes. So create a Okay, say int array of prime number. Okay, so I actually forgot an s there, so prime numbers, there we go. And then we want to put an if statement. Okay, so we say if the reason why I like indicating where this brackets end is because when you develop a lot of when you write a lot of code and the code itself becomes convoluted, it becomes so hard to understand where a block of code ends. And I mean, it just makes debugging very easy. For example, if you have a problem, you want to go through what is going on. So int I of if. Okay, so we want to say if array of prime numbers of I, if array of prime numbers of I, so we're talking about the index of that. Okay, modulus 2 is equal to 0. Okay, all right, so what is this block, this line of code mean is this guy right here means not. Okay, so if array of prime numbers of at index I modulus 2, which means that if you divide that index at index I, if array of prime numbers index I, that location holds maybe 3, and then 3 divided by 2 is equal to 0. All right, so okay, for example, if that location holds 4, and then 4 divided by 2, and then the answer is equal to 0, then that number is not a prime. All right, so and then we say, but when we put this guy here, it means if this statement in here is not true, which means it's not true, then we want to print the increment. Okay, print the increment. So it says we don't have that method there. And then we'll go ahead and create. We just created this. Again, let's comment so to let other developers know if they happen to look into this code. So function to print a number. So function to print a number, basically just say system.out.println and just say x or increment. Okay, so it will just print increment, and say plus. We want to have a comma in between and a space. Okay, so that is done over there. If we go back here, we did not finish our algorithm. and so print increment, it will print increment. So what we want to do next is to say increment plus plus. This will move, this will increment by 1. Okay, so if we go back to what we have done here, is we created a class called find prime numbers, and talked about what this class is going to do, what functions, and public find prime numbers. This is a constructor, is an empty constructor. If we were writing a program that requires other code to execute, when we call this class, we would implement that code in a constructor, and then we just derive an object from this class. But now we are using static methods. There is actually no need for doing that. And then inside this private static void find prime numbers, we are passing in int first number and then int end number. So why are we passing in this? Because the first number will indicate where the first number to start looping through finding prime numbers is, and then the end number. We're creating an array. This is just a order of prime numbers, array of prime numbers, new int end number plus 1. So int increment is equal to 2, and then for int I is equal to first number, I less than endpoint I plus plus. This is a for loop. If you're not familiar with for loops, while loops, and other loops, just find documentation online and go through it. Print increment. If this is where is happening, because we're checking the condition. Once we create this array, we say array of prime numbers at index I is equal to increment. So what we do, if increment is 2, right? And then we say int I is equal to first number. So first number, for example, will be 3. Okay, so if so array of prime numbers of I, which I will be 3. So at index 3 is equal to increment. So it will put 2 in there at index 3, and then it will start looping through. Array of prime numbers of I modulus 2 is equal to 0. If this condition is not true, that's why we put that guy here. Then we want to print that number, because that number is a prime number, because the number holding at index I divided by 2 is equal to 0. Then that number is not a prime number. But if it's not equal to 0, then that is for sure a prime number, and we want to print it to the console. And then after we print it to the console, we want to increment this guy, increment, which is 2. Now it will be 3, and then we go back here, we loop through, because we are looping through between the first number and the end number. And then yeah, we implemented this. Now let's go. Remember when I started, say that public static void main is the main method. Everything that we implement in this class, we have to register here, because this static void method, static void main method, is like the heart of this little class. It gets code first. So let's go comment, like make a comment here, say calling of find a prime number. Okay. Static void main, calling of find prime numbers. So we call find of prime numbers. Okay, so when we hover on there, it says the method find prime numbers is undefined for the type find numbers. Create a method find numbers. What's going on here? Okay, what I like before doing that, let's copy this guy here and paste it here, and then okay, so now it says add argument to match find prime numbers. It's complaining because we have to pass in number. For example, let's say 2, between 2 and 100. Okay, so now let's test it. So as you see, it printed all the prime numbers between 2 and 100. So 3, 5, 7, 9, 11, 13, 15, 17, it goes all the way to 99. So this is an algorithm, and that's what I wanted to make a video about. I will continue making videos about algorithms, because the more I make videos, it makes me a good programmer, kind of returning the knowledge to other people. That's what's important. And another tip that I want to share is it doesn't really matter if you know how to code. All the programmers out there, obviously they know only a couple of languages, and they leverage, they research a lot and read documentation about that language, and it's what matters is how you tackle the problem, your thinking, like algorithms. How do you start coding for a challenge, for a problem? You first understand the problem. If you understand the problem and what requirements are, and then you start looking into what should be done in order to get the solution of that problem. So programming is all about challenges, and it's kind of painful if you find a bug and you don't know how to debug it or what the problem is. So that's why you have to make sure that you comment your code. You let yourself know what is going on, and you'll also let other developers know what is going on in that code. Make sure to date when you wrote the code, because it becomes so confusing sometimes. All right, thank you so much, and looking forward to making other videos.